Welcome, everyone, to another Tuesday edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. I'm Joe Bartel, and got Jake Letarski talking waiver wire pickups for this week. Of course, there's other things in life going on. The election day today, and we have the trade deadline as well, which we are live for at the moment. Thus far, Marshawn Lattimore, Preston Smith, our headliners defensively from a trade perspective. We'll talk about the fantasy ramifications of Mike Williams, Khalil Herbert going to their new teams, as well as any new trades that also happen during the Waiver Wire show. So lots to cover. Let's get to the music. Again, welcome everyone to the Tuesday edition, the November 5th edition, presidential election day for the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Joe Bartel. Alongside me always, every week, Jake Letarski. We have tons of buys, tons of hopefully different trades, although we'll see if it matters from a fantasy perspective, but very little inactionable waiver wire pickups that will matter this week. So our top five list, which we try to do right away every single show. Now, this could change by the end of our podcast, depending on any moves that end up happening. But right now, for what feels like the third consecutive week, a little bit mundane when it comes to your top options.
Yeah, absolutely. So there have been trades in the wide receiver market. That's been something that's been going on, and but none of them made my top five this week. There's one that almost did, and I'll get to that in a sec here, but right off the bat, number one is our cover boy tight end Mike Gesicki of the Cincinnati Bengals here. T. Higgins was a non-participant on Monday's estimate. He's missed a couple weeks in a row. It hasn't been looking good for T coming back to play. And when he is out, and obviously there's Jamar Chase, but Gesicki is getting a ton of the work here. So Gesicki is the only significant one on here where you want to use waiver priority for him. You want to spend fab on him, especially if you need a tight end, because you know how bad tight ends are. So you definitely want to get a piece here. Yeah, he caught 5 of 6 for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also wanted to mention that his teammate Eric All, tight end, also is out for the season with a torn ACL. So Gesicki is number one. Jalen Tolbert, number two I have for Dallas. You know, that's partially based on CeeDee Lamb because they do have Cooper Rush coming in for Dak Prescott, with Dak Prescott likely to land on IR, or maybe that happened since we started here. But yeah, in case CeeDee Lamb misses time, Tolbert would get a big boost there. 3, I have Demario Douglas, aka Pop Douglas of the New England Patriots here. I actually had a $13 bid on him in Stake League last week, and Aaron beat me by $3. So unfortunately, I was unable to acquire him with Drake May at quarterback. He's just more productive. He's great for PPR leagues, not so much non-PPR, but he's getting a lot of targets and is worth a pick. Number 4, from your LA Chargers, I've got Quentin Johnston here. He's back from injury. Herbert's looking better. The offense is looking better. Johnston looks like he's the real deal. Great compliment to Lad McConkey in that offense as a deep threat and a big playmaker. So he's the other one I'm looking for. And unlike most weeks, all of these numbers are 22% rostered or less, so pretty readily available, hopefully, in a lot of the listeners' leagues. The last one I'm going to throw out here is running back Keaton Mitchell of the Ravens. He's a back that we've seen in the past when healthy. We'll see how healthy he is soon enough, but that's kind of a swing home run kind of a move here. Obviously, Derrick Henry is the man there. Justice Hill even gets a lot of the pass catching work, but Keaton Mitchell only needs 4 or 5 touches a game to have a real good fantasy day here. And let me tell you, I tried to find a running back worth picking up this week. Not only in my leagues, not only in, look through every depth chart, and honestly, running backs this week are kind of the same old refrain where you're picking up either a handcuff or someone that's going to get 5-6 touches and you're hoping for the best. Keaton Mitchell could actually be activated before week 10, and he's, out of all of my running back lists, I'm not saying he's going to come out and be a stud right away, or if he'll even be active this week. But out of all the running backs, there's more potential upside here, and I guess that's all we're swinging for. So Gesicki, Tolbert, Demario Douglas, Quentin Johnston, Keaton Mitchell. I almost snuck Mike Williams on at 9% rostered. Of course, traded from the Jets to the Steelers today. I imagine he gets a lot more opportunities with the Steelers. Obviously Mike Tomlin. There's familiarity there. That offense is starting to click with Russell Wilson. He almost made it, but in the end, Tolbert, Pop Douglas, and Quentin Johnston ranked a little higher in terms of receivers for me. So that's my top 5 with an honorable mention for Mike Williams.
I was a little surprised that the Jets moved Mike Williams. Allen Lazard is on injured reserve, so you'd assume in 3 receiver sets, which the Jets run often, right? That's kind of the part of the issue for their offense that's been so static and not having motion. Mike Williams would have mattered a little bit more. Maybe you have Malachi Corley, of course, who had that fumble. I would have thought would be benched to oblivion because of Aaron Rodgers, but that's, I suppose, the third receiver now with Mike Williams in Pittsburgh. That's going to be a fantasy factor. I had no idea Mike Williams is down to 9% roster. I mean, that was one of those guys that was confidently drafted everywhere. So,
there was no reason to roster him, really.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't getting volume, maybe 1 or 2 targets a game. Allen Lazard was getting way more volume because of the Aaron Rodgers effect. Then they bring in Devontae Adams. You have an absolute stud in Garrett Wilson. There's just no room for him to get on the field, let alone get targets. So I can see why they did it.
I think Mike Williams does belong in my top 5 list. So I have Gesicki as well, number 1. My number 2 option, I might even put Mike Williams ahead of this. I just vaguely said streaming quarterbacks. Now, for a lot of folks, again, things happening today, trade deadline, presidential election things, you're likely focused on other parts of this. But there are 4 teams on bye this week, multiple teams next week, and then the dreaded week 14 has a number of fantasy factors in there. So you might be better off waiver wire saying next week is when I'm going to capitalize on a few of these people that are going to have roster crunches. Somebody's going to be dropped. But Browns, Packers, Raiders, Seahawks. Geno Smith was a starting fantasy quarterback. Jordan Love, when healthy, was a starting fantasy quarterback. And more than likely, if you're in a super flex, Jameis Winston is too. So you could talk to me about Justin Herbert. You could talk to me about Bo Nix. You could talk to me about Daniel Jones against the Panthers. There is a streaming quarterback candidate out there. I would imagine they'll be affected. And we'll get to that more when we get to that quarterback spot, because you and I actually have to make a decision in one of our leagues from the NFFC perspective.
All right,
as to who we are going to stream at quarterbacks. This will be a practical approach, and that's why I listed them number 2. Again,
it was almost going to get a lot more interesting because Mahomes had that injury scale last night. All of a sudden, I'm doing college basketball stuff last night. My group text pops up. Mahomes just popped his ACL. I'm like, what? Okay, and then I look and he's out for the next drive. So maybe not so much, but I guess he's the bionic man, almost like Giannis can just bounce back from injuries here. But so not as interesting or as vital of a streaming quarterback. Or were you even using Mahomes regularly? It hasn't been his best year, but we do have a lot of quarterbacks to discuss. So I'm okay with Joe's number 2, just streaming quarterback.
Yeah, streaming quarterback. And again, Mike Williams is up there. Again, I was not aware that he's at 9% rostered. The Russell Wilson factor for the Steelers, if this is Justin Fields throwing the ball to Mike Williams, is different. But the jump ball specialist, I mean, that's what Phillip Rivers was doing all the way back for the San Diego Chargers and Mike Williams. I think Mike Williams can thrive in that sort of offense. Now, it won't be like DeAndre Hopkins for the Chiefs. I would not be eager to play Mike Williams, but he becomes far more rosterable now with Pittsburgh's offense. Again, outside of George Pickens, there really isn't a passer. So I like Mike Williams. He is in the top 5 conversation on a admittedly lower week of waiver wire guys.
Yeah. For some reason, I had it in my head that Mike Williams played for the Steelers at some point, but that's not the case. What I saw that mixed me up was that when he was testing free agency, he visited with Pittsburgh, and they were one of his finalists to be signed. So when I say he's familiar with Pittsburgh, I guess that still stands.
All right, so then my number 3, I have – this is just cheating at the waiver wire at this point. You know, I'm always looking for deeper formats, the NFFC, a bunch of my dynasty leagues, whatever else. Cam Akers, if he is available, joins that Kamani Vidal, Ray Davis, Jalen Wright range of backup running backs. Very clearly the backup to Aaron Jones. You and I are intimately familiar. He does become an injury-prone risk at some point. Trey Benson is a backup running back for the Cardinals that you want to roster fantasy-wise for the same concept that James Conner is. So Cam Akers is in that conversation. The issue is with 4 teams on bye, you probably don't have a roster spot to waste on a backup running back that could play. But I think Cam Akers, after being traded from the Texans to the Vikings, clearly is the backup in that scenario. Yeah. And then I also have Khalil Herbert, and I think actually this one's more actionable than Cam Akers. Now, this one went under the radar earlier this morning, but traded from the Bears for conditional 7th-round pick to the Bengals. Zach Moss, in a separate, or I guess related transaction, Zach Moss was placed on injury reserve. So Chase Brown, who had something like 30 touches or 25 touches this past week in that dominating win, will likely be splitting time with Khalil Herbert in the same role that Zach Moss was. And I think Khalil Herbert's really good. So Herbert would be an instance where I would be very happy to acquire him. Somehow he's still picked up in like 10% of NFFC leagues. I don't understand how that is possible. I like Khalil Herbert a lot.
Yeah, I think Chase Brown is really good. So that's why I left him off of my list. And Khalil Herbert is Khalil Herbert. I mean, no doubt I will be making a Khalil Herbert bid in Stake League this week because I have 2 running backs on the bye and Pacheco's not coming back till late November. So I'm about to get real desperate in this situation here. So I guess, Khalil Herbert will fall on that list as far as people that I might actually bid on this week.
You had Quentin Johnston and Jalen Tolbert among the receiver options. I had mentioned Mike Williams. Let's throw Demarcus Robinson in there too. Now, of course, Cooper Kupp is back. Would Demarcus Robinson have had a 2-touchdown day, including the overtime winner, if Puka Nacua hadn't punched somebody with a helmet on? I don't know. Really fun to be rostering Puka Nacua all season long. That's been awesome. But Demarcus Robinson over the past 2 weeks has scored over 15+ points in full point PPR and has had 3 touchdowns. I don't think it matters, but again, I'm looking for deeper leagues. So I'm doing my top 5 list, and Robinson is available everywhere. Stafford is healthy. That Rams offense is moving. I would rather have Mike Williams. I would rather have Demario Douglas, who you talked about. I'd rather have Quentin Johnston. Jalen Tolbert is not very interesting to me with Dak Prescott at least out for the next 4 weeks due to injury reserve, if not longer. But I think DeMarcus Robinson deserves a mention in deeper formats.
The Cowboys are going to have to continue to pass the whole second half, and there's going to be some garbage time in there for these guys. And Tolbert's going to be – he's been there a few years. He's going to be looking for a contract soon from someone. So he's I think he'll be good, especially – now, we don't know if CeeDee Lamb has to miss any time, so I kind of took a little bit of a leap there. But if I were told today that CeeDee Lamb was going to miss this week or miss multiple weeks, then Tolbert would definitely be in the 2 spots. So maybe I jumped the gun a little bit here, but he's also not quite as available.
The final person on my list, again, I'm looking for deeper formats. Jatavian Sanders, tight end rookie for the Panthers. Now, this one matters a little bit. Jonathan Mingo traded to the Cowboys for a 4th-round pick for whatever the reason. Maybe that's also why I'm not as interested in Tolbert. But also Bryce Young has been looking Sanders' way a little bit more. The Panthers have multiple blocking-only starting tight ends. So when Jatavian Sanders is out there, he's a pass-catching specialist. Obviously, they still have Thielen, who's on injured reserve, could return soon. But otherwise, it's Xavier Legette, who we've mentioned before in past, and then Jalen Coker, who I also think Jalen Coker becomes fantasy relevant, of course. Yeah. The Holy Cross rookie. There's not a lot of instances where you want to play any of these Panther guys, but over the next 4 weeks, at least 2 of the weeks are going to have 4 teams on bye. There might be instances where you have to. You mentioned Stake League, for example, Jake, a deeper format that has shallow bench options. Maybe Coker doesn't matter, but Jatavian Sanders from a tight end perspective, if you miss out on the Mike Gesicki sweepstakes, that's one of those to consider. And I want to be clear with Gesicki, who is our cover boy on the YouTube side things. They are playing the Ravens on Thursday. If T. Higgins was able to play and was against this Ravens defense, then Gesicki becomes a guy that I would not even consider. He's an afterthought. But a literal 1 week streamer in this instance, I think Gesicki makes sense.
I gotta stop you right there. The Ravens defense has been getting torched through the air all season long, and I think they've given up the most yards to tight ends all season long out of any team. So, yes, if Higgins is out, then Gesicki's there. But, you also have to have some context for this. There's a question in the chat about, should I use my priority on Gesicki when I already have Hunter Henry and Jake Ferguson? Ferguson is going to be your guy rest of year for a lot of the same reasons that I threw Tolbert in my top 5. I think Ferguson is an excellent player. Even with Cooper Rush around, he'll still get targets. And I think Ferguson becomes basically a must-start here. Gesicki's much more short-term. Ferguson, you feel comfortable the rest of the year with.
I'm right there with you. Let's pay some bills. I'll do some ads here, but you do a quick Schefter and Rappaport search to make sure we're not missing any trades.
Yep, good call.
It's a football season. Well, it's a football season. It is football season, and the best place to catch the games is at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Las Vegas. It's featuring the best pool in history. Of course, the Stadium Swim you've heard us talk about before. 3 levels, 6 pools, and a 143-foot diagonal screen. Whether it's Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, throw in some Wednesday college hoops, Jake. It's that time of the year. Stadium Swim is America's favorite place to watch football, basketball. I guess not baseball anymore, but you could probably watch the Dodgers spend $1 billion more to win the World Series. Again, super fun. No matter the size of your group, Stadium Swim is the place for you. From owner suites to cabanas, day beds to stadium booths, there are seating choices for everyone. And the best part, of course, Stadium Swim is open 365 days a year with temperature-controlled pools. It's a great place to catch the games all season long. Stadium Swim located at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Las Vegas. Book today at circalasvegas.com. Let's also get a word from our sponsors, Blue Wire. All right, we're back and again talking. Yep. I just want to make sure we have not seen any Schefter or Rappaport.
Yeah, I got one. It's another defensive one. So we already saw Lattimore get traded. We already saw Preston Smith get traded here. Now the Rams are sending cornerback Tre'Davious White and a 2027 7th-round pick to the Ravens for a 2026 7th-round pick.
Yeah, okay. And Tre'Davious White is not rosterable. He's a name, if that.
There's that one point where he was very good.
Oh yeah, remember. 4 years ago for the Bills,
yes,
but
exactly.
The Rams are trying to act like he's a 3rd-round guy. It's like you guys are idiots.
Basically getting involved in a 7th-round pick swap, which Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, there has been a trade, but again, just defense, nothing too relevant there.
All right. Well, the chat as well too. We're obviously having the trade deadline live right now. If the chat mentions anybody, we'll cut into our usual scheduled programming. Let's go to the streaming quarterback section again. 4 teams on bye from a fantasy perspective. Jordan Love out for your lineups. Geno Smith out for lineups. Maybe even Jameis Winston as well. The Browns also out too. So Bo Nix was our cover boy last week. Did okay against the Ravens. Against the Chiefs defense, though, I'm just going to say right now I'm not as interested in that matchup.
Yeah, you're right. I'll give you that here. I mean, what was it? It depends on your scoring, but I've got 21.5 fantasy points against the Ravens, which you know could have been better in a much better matchup here. Chiefs are tougher. He's also on the road here. Again, with Knicks, you're kind of hoping for a good rushing floor, which we've seen, games of 35-25, 47-61, 75-36. So you're hoping for a rushing floor. With the Chiefs, DeAndre Hopkins breaking out, Patrick Mahomes apparently emerging from that game healthy, you're still looking that even with that Denver defense, they're going to have to play a little bit of catch up there and keep pace with Kansas City, similar to what Baker Mayfield had to do in the second half last night. So it's a fine streaming option here, but like we said with the bye weeks here, Jordan Love and Geno Smith are probably startable fantasy quarterbacks, but in single quarterback leagues, you weren't really messing around with Jameis, who we profiled last week, did not do very well, and you're not really messing around with the Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell situation there. So most likely you don't need a streamer this week, but Bo Nix is possibly worth a stash to just see if he can keep it up, and then you can kind of plug and play towards the end of the year. The other one we have to mention again is Russell Wilson, because we were starting to get a lot more optimistic about him before the bye week. Now he has another weapon here. He's only 16% rostered, and he's at Washington this week, so he's the other one that merits kind of standalone consideration. And I bolded this one in our streamers here. But Drake May at Chicago, nice rushing floor. I'm not sure I like him as much this week. Going to Soldier Field, we're going to have cold, rainy, sleety weather probably. So this week maybe not so much, but Drake May does, there's at least some upside here for what he could turn into. And he's showing a bit of a rushing floor here too. So Drake May is maybe not the one I'd stream for this week, but he could be a rest of season play if your league mates have already snatched up Bo Nix and Russell Wilson.
So we have it's actually me. It's not you and I in our NFFC league. I have a conundrum. I have Jordan Love. I have Drake May as my backup. Again, Drake May against the Bears. I'm not comfortable with that matchup. But yet you have Justin Herbert on waivers against the Titans. And then I think it's also Bo Nix as well, too. We talked about the Chiefs.
I'd go get Herbert.
Daniel Jones against the Panthers, Justin Herbert against the Titans, or Drake May against the Bears.
Man, that actually gets really tough because I actually cut Daniel Jones this week because I didn't want to cut Juwan Jennings. I cut Daniel Jones in a super flex this week because I had Russell Wilson and I ended up just starting Kareem Hunt in the super flex spot. Every time I pick up and use Daniel Jones, he burns me. Every time I let him go and forget about him, he starts playing well again to make me start thinking about that cycle. I don't love Daniel Jones, even though it's a great, excellent matchup. If anything, I think Tyrone Tracy lights that team up, and we have a big Tyrone Tracy game. If you can, I'd go. Obviously, you make a backup bid on both of those guys, but I think Justin Herbert is our first priority, and I'm kind of surprised that he's on the waiver wire, even in our 12-team single quarterback league. He's 44% rostered in Yahoo, and like I said when I was talking about Quentin Johnston in the top 5, Quentin Johnston is back. He's here. He's another weapon. This receiving core that we were really afraid of is all of a sudden starting to shape up with Quentin Johnston taking a leap forward, Ladd McConkey being very productive his rookie year, and I'm pretty sure Josh Palmer's still around too. So, they've got guys there, and I think I'd be going Herbert now. And for maybe a rest of season thing too. There are going to be some weeks down the stretch. Do you want to start Jordan Love in Chicago against the Bears in December, or do you want to start, Justin Herbert in a more favorable matchup in nice weather? So I would take Herbert among that discussion. Like I said, 44% roster versus Tennessee.
Okay, so that's where I was at as well too. I have on NFFC do the waterfall bid, so you have a higher bid on Justin Herbert, and then you go Daniel Jones. And worst case scenario, I do play Drake May against Soldier Field. The Bears defense hasn't looked all that good, but it's been mainly against the run. I feel like I know the Cardinals tore up the Bears. You talked to Bears fans.
Yeah. Kyler Murray had 7 fantasy points in the game. They blew out the Bears. It was all James Conner. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and the Amari DiMercato run from 50 yards with 7 seconds left, a perfect way to watch the Bears struggle. It was great. Given my Packer fandom did not have a good Sunday
No,
afternoon.
we did
All right,
not.
Dak Prescott on injury reserve. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Can be out in at least the next 4 weeks. He is droppable at this point. There's no reason to hold on to Dak Prescott in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
He was already like a quarterback 10, 12-ish range.
Yep.
Just drop him, use the other roster spot.
Mm-hmm. He's gone in my single quarterback league. Yep.
In 2 QB formats, would you rather have Cooper Rush or like Bryce Young, for example, again for the Panthers?
Honestly, I think I'd rather have Cooper Rush because, if CeeDee Lamb is healthy, he has at least one absolute stud receiver option, and I like the supporting cast, even though they don't really have a run game here. Maybe there's some theoretical ceiling from Bryce Young, but I really have no interest in him this year. Cooper Rush, upcoming versus the Eagles, versus Houston. Good but not great defenses, against the pass here. Cooper Rush would be the guy that I put him at the top of the 2 quarterback league here. And interesting enough, Trey Lance is now his backup, so we got that going too. And my exact notes here for Bryce Young would have to be pretty desperate, but Bryce Young beat the Saints last week and will presumably keep starting, even though Andy Dalton, with his thumb injury, is now practicing in full. So that's interesting that they're going back to Bryce Young this quickly instead of letting him, sit on the bench and wait and learn. I'm not a huge fan here. This team they've been trying to rebuild and just failing at it for a couple of years. They don't really have, even though I do have some interest in Xavier Legette as a pickup this week, just because of how they've kind of cleaned houses, in terms of weapons, and there's just not that many bodies there. I'm not a real big Bryce Young fan, but I guess I would rather have Bryce Young over the Will Levis or Mason Rudolph combo, whoever gets back to start this week. It looks like Will Levis is getting closer.
And I think from a quarterback perspective, Mason Rudolph in there too. Yeah, I don't know if that really matters too much. Again, I mentioned Dak Prescott a cut at quarterback, given he's an injured reserve, and otherwise with the 4 teams on bye, it becomes a little bit tricky. So,
yeah, you could, in theory, like if you had to cut Jameis, I would be okay with it this week. You're not rostering a Raiders quarterback. I know we were pretty high on Jameis last week, and I liked him. I like him to some degree a little bit the rest of the season, but there are only very specific scenarios for that, so he could go too if you had to.
Okay, cool. Let's move over to the running back position. And obviously we had a lesser group once more. We had talked about Khalil Herbert at the top of the show being traded to the Bengals. I think that one is actionable in the sense that he takes the 1-for-1 snaps that Zach Moss had already. Arguably,
I'm not so sure it's 1-for-1. I think he'll cut in to some degree as he gets acclimated, but like we said, Chase Brown was our guy early on in the year, and I think that it's finally coming to fruition and that he's better. He's just better at pass catching. He's better at running. But
I don't know if Chase Brown can handle the full workload at the NFL level. That's where I think they've clearly identified, whether it be Zach Moss or anybody else, again, in this case, Khalil Herbert, that there needs to be someone that takes 20 to 25 snaps. It's just going to be a present thing, even if Chase Brown is better. We saw this with Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard over the years with the Cowboys. Like I think that's the concept that we're applying with this Bengals offense. It's a matter of, can the Bengals continue to score 35-plus points a game? And they might. I mean, even with Teagan's out, I think it's possible this Thursday against the Ravens. They certainly seem primed to have a good outing, and I think Chase Brown will have a factor. But Herbert is in there in deeper formats. Along the same vein, you had mentioned Keaton Mitchell, a top 5 list candidate for you. Yep. I don't know where Keaton Mitchell actually has a role with Derrick Henry doing what he does for the Ravens. Not that Keaton Mitchell is not going to play, but I think Derrick Henry is so good and is so singular on a defensive game plan that you're always playing Derrick Henry and giving him as many snaps as you can, right?
Yeah, possibly. But I mean, Justice Hill still has a role in that offense, and I'm not exactly sure who it cuts into here. But the Ravens are getting back on track, and who knows, maybe they want to save Henry a little bit. But again, looking at last year's game log, it's long runs and big plays for Keaton Mitchell here. So that's what I'm saying. He need. Like on less than 10 touches, maybe even 5 or 6 touches, he could make a big play or two and make a difference. And that's just kind of the state of running backs right now. Maybe someone like, I threw Ray Davis on my list again. He's 20% rostered. I believe he scored this week. He's getting, I think, average 6 touches a game over the last 3 weeks. If Keaton Mitchell gets those 6 touches in that offense where there are so many options to worry about, I just think that could get a big player too. Obviously, it's risky, super boom or bust. You can't really count on it with a ton of confidence. But as far as running backs whose circumstances have changed from week to week and new guys to talk about, that's why I wanted to throw Keaton Mitchell on the list.
Otherwise, we're rotating through a bunch of the handcuff backup guys like Ray Davis of the world. You have listed Garendo. Maybe that's important because Jordan Mason's been banged up. The Niners, of course, on bye. But McCaffrey is coming back this week.
Yep. Yeah, it's another one that was realistic. When I actually looked at my leagues, who am I going to pick up when I need a desperate flyer at running back? I think Garendo's got some big playability in him too. Jordan Mason is theoretically healthy now, but has been a little banged up with that shoulder injury. And McCaffrey's IR window is open, but I still have no idea what to think about McCaffrey at all. So Garendo is on there at 18%. And then after that, we're right back where we were last week and even the week before with Tyler Algier, Trey Benson, Blake Corum. I think Trey Benson Benson's going to be more, if anything happens to James Conner, Benson's going to be more Conner than Amari DiMarcado is. So I threw him on the list as well. Benson actually available in Stake League. I had to start Benson out of desperation earlier this year. He might be a guy I pick up and hope vultures a touchdown. I guess in a similar vein as like Roschon Johnson. We saw in the chat, again, because this is all relevant to the waiver wire, because these are the running backs you're looking at. We saw in the chat Roschon Johnson or Justice Hill this week. Well, I guess Hill would get a slight downgrade if we know Mitchell is active and playing. We don't know that necessarily. But for me, it comes down to PPR or not PPR. PPR, it's easily Hill. Non-PPR, it's usually Johnson because Johnson's pretty much touchdown dependent. Will he vulture a swift touchdown or not? And again, that's going to be one of those decisions that a lot of people are going to have to make with buys coming up because, we mentioned the quarterbacks being down, but the Browns, Nick Chubb, the Packers, Jacobs, the Raiders, Madison, and Zamir White, people have been cycling in and out of lineups. The Seahawks, Kenneth Walker, and even I saw Charbonnet was 65% rostered here. So if someone drops Charbonnet on a bye week, I think he might jump pretty close to the top of this list as far as these handcuff options go. So watch out for that too. Maybe see who's dropped and if you can get in on that. But yeah, the running back cycle here is just not pretty.
All right, well, let's get to the receiver group. And again, 25 minutes until trade deadline is over. We're going to get a word from our good old friend Nick Whalen here talking about DraftKings or DK Pick 6, as well as Jake continues to update us to make sure we're looking at all the Schefter and Rappaport updates.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right, we're back at again. The Shefty and Rappaport trade deadline updates have been specifically around defensive players. Marshawn Lattimore, Preston Smith, the corpse of Tre'Davious White for the Rams. That's kind of the key. We had Mike Williams earlier, who again, you had mentioned is at 9% rostered. That does have some actionable fantasy value for that Steelers offense in the way that Russell Wilson throws those moon balls. But otherwise, we haven't really seen anybody else get moved, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. And nothing since Tre'Davious White 17 minutes ago. So, yeah, there are a handful of trades, to consider on here. But I fully agree with you that Mike Williams is the only one that changes value significantly of either him or the people around him. So, yeah, you can make him a priority ad. I do want to do a couple public service announcements because again, just because of the landscape, there aren't great names. But if Cedric Tillman is out there at 58% rostered, or if someone makes a tough decision and drops him this week on his bye week, I think he's the man. He's proven he's the real deal. He's Jameis's guy. Even in a real bad week for the Browns, he had a great fantasy day. Grab and stash for sure if you can spare the roster spot on Cedric Tillman. 58%, that's no joke. That's going to be lower at this time next week, so we're probably going to do another PSA to start the wide receivers. Otherwise,
I want to cut in real quick because it's in deeper formats, again, the Browns are on bye this weekend. The Packers guys on bye. Elijah Moore saw 9 targets last week. He had Jerry Jeudy see 14. So all 3 of those receivers, it's just a central funnel of those 3 have gotten at least 8+ targets in every game now over the past 3 weeks. I would hold on to Elijah Moore in deeper formats. I'm holding on to Jerry Jeudy. I'm holding on to Cedric Tillman. If you can avoid cutting anybody else over those 3 Browns receivers, I think rest of season, this is effectively what you're going to see. And Elijah Moore is the one that's most droppable in that instance. He's easily a flex play, I think, in certain instances throughout the rest of the season.
I'm thinking I'm dropping Elijah Moore to grab even Quentin Johnston or
no,
you're not doing that.
I'm holding Elijah Moore. I'm not a believer,
but
full point PPR. I mean, that's
even with Jameis trying to dig his way out of holes for the entire second half, whether they're holes that his defense created or them, to have 3 pass catchers in Cleveland is I don't believe it, and Moore's the odd man out for me.
All right, I mean I think Johnston is so touchdown dependent. Again, his touchdown this past week came in a 40-yard play. Those aren't there all that often. Now the Chargers have capitalized on bad teams. I mean that's partly why they've been able to get the production the way they have. It's run, and then effectively it's a trick pass because you're just assuming that they're going to run again. And oh wait, it's Quentin Johnston going down deeper. Josh Palmer got a long touchdown, stuff like that. And Herbert's so good at throwing the football that he's able to capitalize on those mistakes that other teams make. That doesn't happen every single week. Elijah Moore's consistency happens every week with the targets. That's what I'm looking at more. But it's a fair question for sure.
Yeah, all right. So then the other PSA type guy just missed our threshold, 51% roster. That's Juwan Jennings of the 49ers. Remember, Debo dealt with pneumonia. Now he's back apparently, but Brandon Ayuk is still out for the season. Juwan Jennings, who's had some big games earlier this year, is the biggest candidate, I think, in my eyes to replace him. He's only 51%. With DK Metcalf out in a bye week situation last week, I had to make a drop, and Juwan Jennings is one of the options. Instead, I dropped Daniel Jones in a 2-quarterback league to save Juwan Jennings. So if that gives you any sense of how I valued him, that was the case right there. So I don't know if anyone else had the same situation, a similar situation, and had to make the Jennings drop call, the tough one. But that's certainly possible. That's why he's down back at 51% in his bye week. But sticking on the 49ers, because he made our show last week, but of course they were heading into their bye week. But Ricky Pearsall is only 28% rostered. That could definitely be an option as well. If you need a receiver, because he has the draft pedigree. He's the rookie, but he could also, for all I know, it could be him that gets the Ayuk role, and Juwan Jennings kind of stays where he is. I'm not quite sure I'm sold on that notion yet, but Pearsall is definitely working in the mix here if we're talking about a list.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I think I would rather have Pearsall over the majority of our top 5 lists that we've already mentioned. Again, Mike Williams is kind of a late addition given his trade to Pittsburgh, but otherwise you've talked about the DeMario Douglas of the world. You had Jalen Tolbert a little bit higher. I'm fading Tolbert with Cooper Rush as your quarterback for the next month for the Cowboys, but Quentin Johnston's in that mix. I had talked about deeper leagues, DeMarcus Robinson in there as well too. And it's unfortunately pretty bleak in deeper formats with the waiver wire guys. I think next week with 4 teams on bye, and again, more buys to come, is when you'll see some action.
Yep.
So
I'm about to run into quick hitters, but there's one that I think is just a tier above the quick hitters, and that's Xavier Legette. You got to watch that hand injury he had to make sure, but he caught 4 of 6 targets for 33 and a touchdown. And of course, we don't know about Thielen coming back or not. They traded Mingo today, who wasn't really involved in the offense much anyway.
Johnson was traded too.
Deontay Johnson, of course, traded here. So yeah, you're really down to Xavier Legette and Jalen Coker. And I think, Legette is the one to own if you
and Jatavian Sanders, my guy, in my top 5 list of tight end.
I had to look up who that guy was, Joe.
I know. He's, as you should. Jake, we're talking about like tight end 22 in that instance. We're going deeper leagues for a reason. Yes.
Yeah, so speaking of deeper leagues, I've got a few quick hitters, deeper cuts, if you will, for those desperation plays here. A.J. Brown hurt his knee. He's questionable. John Dotson got a big boost in snap share, but he only was targeted once and got a 36% 136-yard touchdown. Again, we're talking Hail Mary. He did make a great play on that game, and he was a former, I can't remember if he was a first-round pick off the top of my head, but I remember he was an early pick, top 20 pick, so there's some draft pedigree there. Who else do I have on here? Sterling Shepard led Tampa Bay in targets. He had 5 because Jalen McMillan was out with a hamstring injury. That was the guy we liked last week. Obviously didn't pan out. Sterling Shepard caught 4 of his 5 targets for 48 yards. So, there's that. That Tampa Bay defense is so dreadful that there's going to be a lot of pass attempts for Baker Mayfield.
For what it's worth,
many are going to the running backs. So many are going to Cade Otton.
Yeah, I'm not dropping Jalen McMillan. I think when he's healthy, he is still the number 1 target.
Yep.
And then Mike Evans does not come back for another 2 weeks at minimum yet. So.
Exactly. Yeah, he's out this week, and then they have a week 11 bye, which is going to be rough. That's been rough on me here. Westbrook Ikine, he was again a Hail Mary last week, but he scored a touchdown in 4 straight games. And 4 and 6 targets over his last 3. Calvin Ridley can't do it all. Again, the Titans, even with their dreadful quarterback play, have to dig themselves out of holes, and there's some garbage time for Ikine. I actually had Demarcus Robinson down a little further. I saw Demarcus Robinson come up on so many lists here because everyone's trying to make the logic, he's better when Kupp and Nakua are back. But it's like everyone who wrote these columns is forgetting that Nakua punched somebody and was knocked out of that game. Does he get that type of volume, those type of touchdowns? With Nakua and Kupp both fully in business there. I'm not so sure he does.
To answer the DeMarcus Robinson part that you're mentioning, it's a very good point. I think there's been the last 3 weeks or so, just dread's not the right word, but anyone who's writing those articles or doing the podcast like us, you're stretching for content. I mean, truthfully, you're stretching for content, and we have to find these guys that maybe are a factor or could be out there deeper or whatever else. And so DeMarcus Robinson, like I did for my top 5 list, becomes a possible name. But you're right, Puka Nacua being ejected, I think certainly played a part in that.
And we want to at least give you every possible name here because we're catering to leagues of all shapes and sizes here. And I don't know if you're in your family 8-team league or your super competitive 16 or even 20-team league. So, but we'll get you a couple names for those. I mentioned. I didn't mention yet, Drake London is day-to-day with a hip injury, so that possibly means more looks for the likes of Mooney, McLeod, even Kadarius Hodge. I think Ray McLeod.
Why would the Falcons do that?
Yeah, exactly. Why would the Falcons do that ever? But yeah, Ray McLeod is probably my pick out of that group here. I actually have rostered him in a couple spots, out of desperation because he gets unique, tricky usage, that isn't quite normal wide receiver stuff. I mean, I forget his number, but he's like 22. He's like a running back number. But anyway, so he gets touches in unique ways. Maybe more of that for him if Drake London doesn't play here. And then, man, the Saints are in such rough shape. Chris Olave, of course, we wish him the best.
He's going to be on injured reserve, I bet. I wouldn't be surprised if he's out for at least.
Yeah, when you're knocked out cold like that, that's usually the next step.
Second time in 2 weeks, right?
Did he actually get knocked out the week before? I totally missed that.
It was either the second time in 2 weeks or second time in 3 weeks.
I was going to say, then what's he doing playing this week if it was last week? But,
I think it's second time in 3 weeks. You're right. Yeah, but I think he's on reserve.
Yeah, but the Saints distribution is not good at all. Their receivers.
Shocker.
Their receivers, I mean, because Bub Means is out too.
He went on injured reserve as well. I think this past Saturday.
So you're looking at Mason Tipton, Cedric Wilson, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and Jermaine Jackson. And Jermaine Jackson's probably more of a runner, if anything, here. Technically, it was Mason Tipton that led in snap share and route run rate, but he did not catch a pass on any of his 3 targets. Cedric Wilson at least caught 2 of his 3 targets. Honestly, if we're talking, desperation here, I know Jamal Williams didn't play this week, but Kendre Miller went on IR for the Saints. And, Kamara maybe gets used a little more as a pass catcher, and Jamal Williams sneaks a carry in there. I actually think it's a good transition to our tight ends because Taysom Hill gets a big bump there just because the usage they have to.
We've had this conversation in the office now the past couple times. Dennis Allen, former head coach of the Saints, of course, earlier this week.
Did you see the Pope's tweet this morning?
No, I did not. No,
he did. He was talking about #Saints and just did this whole biblical thing about how they're such a core structure of every. Oh God, I should have had that queued up. Look up the Pope's tweet, but it did that. It did the auto insert the New Orleans Saints logo, and every single comment from the Pope was all talking about. But they just fired Dennis Allen. Does this mean we're going to be okay? That might actually turn the Saints season around if you haven't looked that up. So.
Well, Dennis Allen loves Taysom Hill more than you and I love Culver's, which is saying something here that we're based in Madison, Wisconsin. So that Dennis Allen is gone, you'd assume literally anybody coming and be like, well, what if we don't do all this weird gadgety stuff with Taysom Hill because we don't have the guy that loves him nearly as much? But But like you mentioned, Olave.
Who do they got?
There's nothing else. So maybe Taysom Hill does become more of a factor. I think it's fair to say I want more shares of the Panthers offense than I do the Saints offense. That's how far we've gotten. Even if Derek Carr is healthy, I want more Leggett. I think Coker has some value. Jatavian Sanders will have one in a second as well at tight end. I want more Panther guys, and Jonathan Brooks will be activated off the injury reserve this week as well too. Then I want Saints at this point in the season, which is wild to say.
Ooh, I miss Jonathan Brooks. That actually could be interesting.
Yeah, well, do you bench Chuba Hubbard if you're the Panthers? Like Chuba Hubbard's been the one bright spot of their offense. I think more than likely Jonathan Brooks still gets worked back. Chuba Hubbard does a lot of stuff, but it's going to make things more complicating and already bad offense. So
yeah, I mean, you talk about unknown and theoretical upside and buy it before in case he has a good game, and then everyone wants to buy it. I guess now would be the time to make your move on that. If again, we're talking desperation though.
So tight ends, we have mentioned Mike Gesicki again, top of the show. They play Thursday. T. Higgins likely not playing again. Gesicki has benefited really well when T. Higgins is not out there. Like you mentioned with Taysom Hill, I had talked about Jatavian Sanders for the Panthers. Theo Johnson, the other rookie tight end, there was really effectively two rookies this class. Theo Johnson for the Giants has done a few things more. And again, the Giants have the Panthers this week. But it's kind of a brutal waiver wire pickup show again for
exactly. And I'll say it again, but Hunter Henry is still only 36% rostered, and he's very playable in today's tight end landscape here. In case you lost anyone, I mean, if you're holding Hunter Henry and Mark Andrews, if you're holding Hunter Henry and Sam Laporta, Hunter Henry is in consideration to start over those guys, especially as long as Drake May's at quarterback. We kind of backed off on this last week because we thought that he might miss and Jacoby Brissett might be the case, but Henry is a perfectly fine tight end option.
Real quick before we have final 10 minutes of the trade deadline, anything else that you've seen thus far, Jake?
I'll pop over. Nope, still nothing from Schefter.
I assume the chat would have told us as well too if there's this game-breaking trade.
Exactly. Just not too much going on in terms of the trade deadline.
Receivers moved each of the last 3 weeks, so it's not crazy that we've kind of had this. I would have thought a Darius Slayton or somebody like that would have also been traded at some point too. Darius Slayton would have been a mover for us. Etienne and Bigsby I've been talking about now for weeks that I thought the Jaguars would trade Etienne. I'm surprised they haven't. That is the one that's really killing us in our league where we have Godwin, Diggs, and now CeeDee Lamb. If we could have just had a starter out of the Jaguars backfield, that's not going to happen, it seems like, unfortunately. But I mean, streaming defenses, kickers, it's going to be a short show, but that's kind of reflective of what the waiver wire period is this week.
Exactly. I have the Giants at 6%. It's a neutral site against Bryce Young and the Panthers here.
Oh, it's a London game. Thank God we get to wake up early for this. Woohoo.
Yes, exactly. Or that might be a Germany game, actually.
Oh, okay, fine.
Because I remember seeing some
You're right. I know you're right.
Interestingly tasteful jokes about the worst thing we've done to Germany. But anyway, so the Giants 6% neutral site. Bryce Young and the Panthers. They actually the Giants lead the league in sacks. I did not realize that, but they have the most sacks. So again, you look for that floor. Bryce Young likes to run around, maybe not so much make decisions, or at least good ones. That's up there on there. Of course, we talked about the Saints disaster, right? We literally had a debate about which offense is worse and which one we want less pieces of, whether it's the Panthers or the Saints. So of course, the Falcons are at home against the Saints, who are an absolute disaster. Falcons at 9% are there, and then this is kind of an honorable mention. But the Bears, they're above our threshold at 59% on Yahoo. I believe they were a little bit lower on ESPN leagues. They're home against New England this week. And I know I showed some optimism for Drake May. I don't think this is necessarily the game where we see that necessarily. So the Bears are in play if you can grab them here. They've got some theoretical playmakers there. But otherwise, you're streaming some pretty interesting defenses and playing matchups, because the Giants, the Falcons, you're cutting them immediately the week afterwards.
Yeah. I'll bring this one up as well, too. The Steelers were on bye last week. Your leading fantasy kicker was Chris Boswell. If he is available, and knowing what our waiver wire was this week, I would put down a buck or two to get the best kicker. And I think the Steelers offense got better adding Mike Williams.
Chris Boswell or Younghoe Koo?
Oh, you have kicker 1 and 2. I think you're set. I would pick up Chris Boswell, even knowing the dome to not dome.
Chris Boswell over Jake Bates.
Yes, Chris Boswell for sure.
Interesting. Okay, sure. I've got some kicker transactions to make this week.
I think
this is the state of the wire. It's our first kicker conversation of the year. Were there any good questions that we missed for the last couple minutes?
I've been answering actually all of them for the most part. This is a fair one that I hadn't quite looked at all the way through yet. So this person has Kamara and has been offered Aaron Jones, Marvin Harrison, and Romeo Doubs. Their starting running backs in this instance, if they were to accept it, would then be Aaron Jones and David Montgomery, with Bucky Irving and Tyrone Tracy on the bench.
Man, it depends on the cut situation because obviously you have to cut 2 players here. But I'd be willing to depart with any of that sinking ship for what I can get. And I like this deal. I mean, Dobbs isn't an every week starter, but I think Marvin Harrison will have more good games, and I think Aaron Jones is solid this year. You know, I'm assuming redraft league, and even then you probably go with the other side. But normally I say best player overall in the league. But remember, none of us were particularly high on Kamara this year. I know he's been a great fantasy running back, but I didn't get any shares. I think we start to even out, especially as the quarterback play stays bad and as the other weapons are there. You just game plan for Kamara and absolutely nothing else. So I would take the other side. Give me Aaron Jones. I would ask for more than Aaron Jones versus Kamara straight up, but in the back of my head, I'd rather have Aaron Jones the rest of the year.
No, I think I'd rather have Kamara rest of the year, but you're right. It is relatively close. And I actually would say, based on production and name value, you could probably get more for Kamara than just Aaron Jones and Marvin Harrison. For example, I brought up this trade, somebody who's looking to acquire Breece Hall. And I think it's effectively in this question also acquiring Kareem Hunt. Now, reminder to folks, the Chiefs will have Kareem Hunt as the starter for at least 2 more weeks. It sounds like Pacheco could return around the fantasy playoffs. It's
I looked that up late November. Man, do I need Pacheco in the worst way possible. I've got him all over the place.
And I think this is the right sell point for Kareem Hunt, that whoever's acquiring him is basically trying to stay afloat, and you could probably get a premium asset given what he's done. And I would assume when Pacheco is back, Kareem Hunt then falls to the wayside. So you're talking about maybe a 3 or 4 week stretch where you can capitalize on Kareem Hunt going to somewhere else and getting insane value, because more than likely you didn't listen to me, at least, and picked up Kareem Hunt off of waivers. You're talking about free money. I mean, this is found money in that instance where I'd be happy to move Kareem Hunt in any sort
with a limited thing. So the obvious answer is take the Saquon side here, because you want the best player in the deal. That's always my first instinct, right? I know Breece Hall had a little more draft capital attached to him, but that Jets team hasn't quite gone as we've hoped. And that's Saquon all the way in that deal.
Cool. I guess I'll ask for one real quick search just to make sure no Mike Williams, Marshawn Lattimore news dropped here, or at least any other relational trades in that regard. But otherwise, I think that effectively does it.
I'm hitting refresh just to make sure. And
there's the trade deadline.
We got nothing. We got nothing here. Trade deadline in 5 minutes. Hopefully we gave you some interesting banter here while you're waiting in line at the polls today.
Yes, that's the goal. Yeah.
And that's my next stop. I just hope I don't have to wait outside because it is raining like crazy. It's miserable in Wisconsin, just like you saw at Lambeau this week. If you caught the game of the week. So.
Oh, I thought you were just talking about how my attitude is with fantasy this week. I would have won a very pivotal matchup to possibly be in playoff contention if the Buccaneers would have just been smart, Jake, and went for 2 to win the game. But they decided to go for the extra point, tie the game, lose the coin flip. Travis Kelce gets 4 more points, and bing, bom, boom, I lose. And now I'm in the possible relegation spot for the league, all because the Buccaneers are idiots.
I got toasted by Kelce last night, too. At least one of the leagues I had Kareem Hunt on my side to cancel it out to some degree. And one of the leagues I was already way lost in. But, Travis Kelce is legit back in a big way. There's a question about DeAndre Hopkins out there too, my answer was DeAndre Hopkins. I used Worthy over Hopkins on DraftKings this week, thinking maybe Hopkins gets worked in. Stupid.
All right, well, thanks again for everyone listening, and we'll be back in next Tuesday, hopefully for more running backs or anybody else besides receivers from a waiver wire perspective. But best of luck with your fantasy lives too.
Exactly.